He could finish off Shaltir, no matter what spells he used. Not even that super tier spell which could grievously damage the undead, fallen down, could do so. I believe you only have 2 more 10th tier spells in you? You had too much mana, so I can't really judge how many more spells you can cast. That's correct. I should only be able to cast about 2 more spells, I believe? That was not a lie. She had one. Shaltir quirked up the corner of her mouth in a knowing smile. There was no longer any doubt that Shaltir Bloodfallen was the victor, and Ains Ulgaun was the defeated. Shaltir patronizingly congratulated the loser, who had struggled so bravely until now. Truly magnificent. I had to deplete my MP, and use up all my skills in order to drain your MP to that level, Ains-sama. You are to be praised for lasting this long. Shaltir tightened her grip on the Spjut lance. Now, all that was left was to deliver the fatal blow in melee combat. You are correct. Thus, I shall humbly accept your praise. Shaltir's forehead twitched. She was very annoyed. She was very annoyed at Ains Ulgaun's nonchalance. However, in the end Shaltir managed to swallow her rising uneasiness. No matter how she pondered the situation, Shaltir could not think of how Ains could turn the situation around. He had already used his ace in the hole. Thus, that was probably not composure, but the resignation of a death row convict, who had already foreseen his fate. Shaltir slowly closed the distance between them. Even if her enemy tried to cast a spell from a scroll, Shaltir was confident of being able to strike faster than him. Thus, there was no need to be hasty. Ains did not flee, but merely stood proud where he was. She could sense his determination from his stance, and so Shaltir asked, "Any last words?" "Well, since you felt that I was a disadvantage, that without my MP I would be nothing more than a mook, you came at me with everything you had. For that, I must thank you, Shaltir. If you had fought more carefully, things would not have gone so smoothly." Wah? Shaltir doubted her ears. It would seem she had heard some nonsense. Ignoring Shaltir's confusion, Ains continued evenly, "The most crucial thing in PvP is to deceive one's enemy. For instance, pretending that you're vulnerable to holy elemental attacks, when you're largely immune to them after swapping out your gear. On the other hand, there's the fact that you're still weak against fire elemental attacks. However, I seem to have miscalculated. I used false data, life, because I thought you would use life essence. It would seem that was a waste. If there is a next time, do remember to check your opponent's health. That's the difference between the theory and practice of tactics." This was not what Shaltir wanted to hear. Shaltir could not understand the meaning of those words. No, she did not want to understand them. He did not want to admit his defeat. No, she could feel his strong will. More than that, he sounded like victory was at hand for him. Shaltir continued closing the distance, but the thoughts welling up inside her checked her step. Why isn't Ains-sama backing off? As an arcane magic caster, he can't possibly beat me at this range. This must be a bluff. My friend Peroncino told me a great many things when he was making you. After I came to this world, I took the liberty of memorizing everyone's information. However, aside from my black history, Pandora's actor, you are probably the NPC in Nazarick with whom I am the most familiar. Didn't you say you didn't know my skills? Ains smiled. I was lying, of course. Wasn't that obvious? I thought that perhaps if I said so, you would take the bait. That's because it would be quite hard to win if you saved your impure shockwave shield until the end. The flow of blood meant nothing to the undead, but Shaltir could feel hers draining from her face. In exchange, a wave of agitation spread through her entire body. That was not a lie. Nothing he was saying here was a lie. Ains Ulgaun was standing before her without running away, because he was confident of attaining victory. Ah! Shaltir's lips parted and she wailed, the better to vent the emotions welling up inside her breast. Shaltir was the lion, Ains was the rabbit, she should have been the hunter. No, that was wrong. This should have been a battle between lions, it was just that Shaltir had treated him as a rabbit, The anxious and uneasy Shaltir clutched at her speat lance, intending to finish this battle right away, intending to kill her foe with strike after strike, even if he fought back. An instant before that, the spell Ain's cast went off, and he reached into his robe. A clear, crisp sound rang forth. Shaltir could not help but doubt her eyes. This was impossible. The speat lance had bounced off some kind of white metal. If it had been deflected by magic, Shaltir would have pressed the attack, because she knew Ain's did not have much MP left. That would simply have been his death throes. However, Shaltir froze as she beheld the scene before her. That pure white radiance was not the work of magic. It was from a suit of armor. It was a set of pure white armor, with a huge sapphire set into the breastplate, which radiated a pure, holy light. That suit of armor was on Ain's body, and it had repelled the thrust of the speat lance. From his superior height, Ain's looked toward Shaltir. No, he was probably looking down on Shaltir. She was angry, of course, but Shaltir did not have the energy to spare on that, because a cold voice spoke to her. From the start, I too was planning to end this battle in melee combat. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. There was a loud bang as a hand struck the magnificent table, which shuddered from the blow it had taken. The guardians here had been watching the battle intently. They had struck the table several times, but this was the first time that particular person had done so. Impossible. That armor belongs to that supreme being. Touch me, Sama, is it? Albedo squinted at the crystal monitor as she breathed the name of that supreme being. Correct. That island, Touch me, Sama's armor. Cocytus seemed very excited. No, in truth, he was very excited, as he exclaimed. The pure white armor which Ain's wore belonged to one of the 9 people in Yggdrasil, who possessed the class of world champion. Only the winner of the developer-sanctioned tournament could possess the class of world champion, and the company awarded a special piece of equipment to the champion as a prize. Touch Me had chosen that suit of white armor. This specially made armor complemented his status as a world champion, and its abilities exceeded those of divine class items, putting it on par with guild weapons. Of course, since it was a gift to the champion, only the world champion could equip it. However, by using the warrior transformation spell, Perfect Warrior, it would seem, he is no longer bound by any job-related penalties and can make use of warrior equipment. Demiurge's tone was filled with respect, and Albedo murmured in awe. To think his plans had been laid out that far in advance. Albedo broke out in goosebumps, and she hugged herself. By turning into a warrior via magic, one could equip several items that would normally only be usable through specific job classes. This was a method the developers had implemented to allow players without specific classes to make use of items, such as shurikens, vajras, kasa, and other bizarre pieces of equipment. However, it would seem that spells remit also extended to those prize items issued by the developers to world champions. Astounding to think. He actually thought that far ahead. I am in awe. Though the battle had not yet been decided, the guardians present were filled with incomparable reverence for Ain's cunning and wealth of experience, which had allowed him to weave such an intricate plan and guide it to fruition. And as the guardians watched the crystal monitor, their delight and awe growing within them, the sound of the table thumping could be heard again. That is. Again, Cocytus raised his voice. Part 3. The sound of clashing metal rang forth. Gaia. An unbelievable sight unfolded before Shaltir's eyes. The edge of the blade cleaved into Shaltir's chest from her shoulder, until it reached her unbeating heart. Shaltir's crimson armor was dyed an even deeper shade of red. She scrambled back, looking at Ain's in shock. Ain's held a katana. It was a massive nodachi, wreathed in electrical discharges. That sword had cut through Shaltir's armor as though slicing through paper. Her armor was a legendary class item. Only a rare few divine class weapons could go through it with such ease. Then, there was only one answer. Yes. Ains was holding one of those few weapons. Shaltir screamed the name of that blade as she coughed up blood. Takamikazuchi Mk8. Shaltir leaped back, avoiding the strike from the Nodachi. The fact that she had jumped so far beyond the Nodachi's striking range was a sign of how frightened she was of that sword. However, nobody would mock Shaltir for doing, even less so if they were denizens of the great underground tomb of Nazareth. Rather, they would have sympathetic looks on their faces, because they all feared this weapon of the Supreme Being. They feared the sight of this sword, named after and wielded by warrior Takamikazuchi, one of the 41 Supreme Beings. Did I not say so, Shaltir? Ain's gown is invincible. Ain stepped forward, and Shaltir immediately took 2 steps back. Shaltir, you should know this. Ain's gown is the combined power of 41 people. You had no hope of victory from the start, Ains calmly said. His words rang with absolute confidence and the utmost assurance. The dangerous battle of earlier had been like treading on thin ice, where one false step might send him to the bottom of the lake. But now, Ains had brought the battle to his enemy. Currently, their MP was 0, but Shaltir's HP was higher. However, after using Perfect Warrior to become a level 100 warrior, Ain's stats far outstripped Shaltir, who was not a pure warrior. In addition, Ain's equipment was superior to hers. That meant, the unfavorable battle from earlier was a thing of the past. The man who had turned the tables advanced with even, steady steps. Shaltir Bloodfallen, open your eyes and witness the might of the ruler of the great underground tomb of Nazareth, the one who gathered the supreme beings, and the man whom you praise with your very own mouth. Those words were the signal for the attack. Ain stepped forward and delivered an overhand strike with the Nodachi. Shaltir leapt away, preparing to jump forward as she did. Her aim was to counterattack Ain's in the opening after he made his move. Sure enough, it was hard to be overly precise with the Nodachi Takamikazuchi Type 8, much like it was with the Spute Lance. The lightning-swathed Takamikazuchi Mk8 rent the air as it swung down, and then the tip of the blade halted in front of Shaltir, who was preparing to jump, before thrusting forward at incredible speeds. No matter how strong one was, it was very difficult to stop a full-strength blow in the middle of a swing. This was especially true when one used a large and heavy weapon. Yet, Ains could do it. This was because he had not used all his force to attack. In other words, he knew that the strike would have been avoided, so he had deliberately feinted an opening. The continuation of that attack had also been planned out, down to which strike he would use to follow up. It was an instinctive, natural movement for a warrior. Ains simply provided the bodily strength to turn it into reality. However, he probably would not have considered these matters had he not experienced combat in Irantal. He would probably have unleashed one massive earth-shattering strike after the other, and taken Shaltir's counterattacks. Even after becoming a level 100 warrior, he would not have been able to fully utilize a warrior's abilities, and they would have ended up wasted. Much like driving a car, one might have a license, but there was a world of difference between someone who only had a license on paper and one who was used to driving on the open roads. Both of them could operate a car, but their reactions to sudden changes in circumstances would be drastically different. In other words, experience. During this battle with Shaltir, Ains felt that this experience was his most potent weapon. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit, it'll be hard to avoid it. That was what Shaltir calmly thought as she saw the tip of the sword coming at her, as fast as lightning. However, thrusts were a risky move. One could use the weaknesses of thrusting attacks to turn a dangerous situation into an opportunity. Then it can't be helped. Shaltir put her hand into the path of the thrust, having decided to sacrifice her left arm. As the blade pierced her palm, Shaltir twisted her left hand, successfully diverting the thrust to one side. It did not penetrate her chest, but the tip of the sword still drove through her left palm, into the muscle and bone, until it was deeply buried in her left arm. In addition, the electricity surrounding the Nodachi coursed through Shaltir's body. Though she was undead, the sensation of being savagely penetrated still filled Shaltir with something resembling terror, though she kept the corners of her mouth raised. It was a smile, not one which an injured person would make, but neither was it a brave front. After all, that was what Shaltir had intended. Shaltir tensed her left arm. The Nodachi halted, pinned down by her muscles. Thrusts were maneuvers that might end up leaving one's weapon stuck in a foe's flesh should they miss their mark. Hence, they were not very practical in combat. In other words, they had a weakness. Shaltir knew that weakness, which was why she had sacrificed her left arm to force an opening in her opponent's defense. She could not have done so if she could not grasp the Nodachi in her left hand in the instant before it impaled her, a feat which she had to perform within tenths of a second. "You're open now." Now that his Nodachi was tied up, Ains had no way of defending against the Spit Lance. As Shaltir thrust the Spit Lance at lightning speed, she once more beheld a startling sight. Ains let go of the divine class weapon in his hand, a magic item of the highest order, and then withdrew one of the several wooden sticks slotted at his waist. "Ha! Are you retarded? How could a little stick like that block the Spit Lance? And then you actually let go of your divine class weapon. Isn't that a colossal mistake?" Granted, not remaining attached to warrior Takamikazuchi's divine class weapon was a wise decision, but there was no way he could win after losing that weapon. With a mocking smile on her face, Shaltir vowed to make Ains suffer more than her left hand had. She thrust the Spit Lance with all her might, and then it was deflected, with a clear, crisp sound of metal against metal. "Eh?" Shaltir exclaimed in surprise. The wooden stick was no longer in Ains' hand, and in its place were two kodachis, which had deflected the Spit Lance. One was as blindingly brilliant as the sun, while the other glowed with the pure, gentle light of the moon. Ains' hand, which were holding the kodachis, began smoking. It would seem that those weapons were the bane of the undead. "You were saying something about being open, Shaltir?" "Che. What's going on?" Shaltir could not feel the weight of the weapon which had pierced her left arm. It had vanished, as though it could not exist in the same world as the new weapons which Ains had prepared. Shaltir sensed that they had returned to their original place. "Well, that's true. If you can't handle a weapon in each hand, sticking to one would be wiser." Ains' mumblings seemed to have been directed at someone elsewhere. "Then, is that the case for me now?" Shaltir could not understand what he meant by those words, and after losing her balance, the moonlit kodachi swung at her. The attack at her neck was a feint. The kodachi nimbly altered its course and streaked at her shoulder. It was only by the barest of margins that the Spit Lance managed to deflect it. Ains took the opportunity to close the gap with Shaltir. Since his foe was using a massive weapon, drawing nearer would make it harder for his opponent to make her move. This was the thinking of a grizzled veteran, one who was intimately familiar with that idea. Then, the other kodachi, the sunlit one, sliced into the gap in the Spit Lance's defense and lightly pierced Shaltir's body. "Ah!" She wailed in pain. Actually, being stabbed did not hurt that much. The problem was the agony which came from the holy element energy which filled her body like poison. That pain was much harder to bear. Ains worked the kodachi from side to side, while it was still within her, as though to saw open the wound. "Get away from me." The distance between Shaltir and Ains was too narrow to use the Spit Lance, so she kicked at him. He blocked it with a kodachi, but he could not fully resist the kick, and was flung back. At this moment, Shaltir saw that Ains' hands had released the kodachis, and they had another small stick in them. Then, as the stick fragmented, a huge, savage-looking gauntlet covered Ains' hand. That gauntlet was so big that it nearly dragged on the ground from a standing position. "Take this." And as Ains shouted, he punched her. Shaltir reflexively raised the Spit Lance to defend herself, but the massive impact traveled through the Spit Lance and washed over her entire body. "Gugya!" Shaltir yelped pathetically as she was flung backward, as though struck by a gigantic fist. The hit did not do much damage, and the Spit Lance could block physical attacks, but the knockback effect was enough to overcome the magic items protecting her. She recovered her lost balance quickly thanks to her magic items, but a fire still burned inside her head. How dare you force such a pitiful sound out of me? I'll make sure you squeal like that before I tear you apart, huh?" Her eyes shifted, and as she saw a massive globe of light, Shaltir's agitation vanished. That flare of sunlight came from the bow Ains had drawn. Its arrow of light were naturally targeted at Shaltir. No, no way, how could that be? Ho Yi's bow. This weapon had been named after the hero who had shot down the sun, while China was still a balkanized mass of smaller countries. It was also the main weapon of the supreme being who had created Shaltir.